Hello guys, gals and non-binary pals, welcome back to Budget Brew with me, Lotus. Today's brew is Falco Spara, the Pactweaver, and we've got this one under $30 TCG market price, and as always, basic lands not included in the price. So, starting with the commander, Falco Spara Pactweaver is 1 green, white, blue for a legendary creature bird demon that's a 3/3 with flying and trample. It enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to pay its other costs. So what we're trying to do is make a lot of counters for us to continuously utilize the top of our library and cast more. So let's start with the ramp. First we have Emergent Sequence, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, then shuffle. That land becomes a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature that's still a land. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each land you had enter the battlefield under your control this turn. Vastward Surge, 3 and a green with kicker 4. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. If the spell was kicked, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Fertilid, 2 and a green for a 0/0 elemental that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters that we can remove a +1 counter. Target player searches their library for a basic land card. Beneath the Sands is 2 and a green sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, but it also has cycling just for the additional card draw if we don't need to ramp. And Circuitous Route, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gates, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. And then finally, not exactly ramp, but it helps. So Hamza, Guardian of Ashrin, 4 green white for a legendary creature Elephant Warrior 5/5. The spell costs 1 colourless less to cast for each creature you control with a +1 counter on it. And creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1 counter on it, making our creatures potentially a lot cheaper to cast. Ying Yangu the Wildcrafter, 2 and a green planeswalker. It's more the static that we like, that each creature with a +1 counter has add 1 mana of any colour, but we can utilise the -1 to add the counters to those creatures. We then need some card draw, but Simic is the best for that. Bred for the Hunt, 1 green and blue for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Fathom Mage, 2 green blue for a human wizard 1/1 with Evolve. Whenever a +1 counter is put onto Fathom Mage, you may draw a card. Inspiring Call, 2 and a green, draw a card for each creature you control with a +1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible end of turn, which is also good protection. And Primal Empathy, 1 green blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, put a +1 counter on a creature you control, which will then let us cast from the top of our library by taking that counter off, so it's a win-win. And then we need to make those counters to make our commander work better. The new Broker's Ascendancy, green, white, blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control, topping up our planeswalker from earlier. Citadel Siege, 2 white, white for an enchantment. We're just going to choose Khans, and at the beginning of combat on our turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature we control. And Felidar Retreat. We make cats and put +1 counters for every time land enters the battlefield. Paradox Zone, 4 and a green, enters the battlefield with a growth counter on it. At the beginning of your end step, double the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone, then create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. Now we need some removal, which every deck should be running. Cleansing Nova is a nice one to destroy all creatures or all artifacts and enchantments. Collective Effort, it can help us destroy big creatures or enchantments or put +1 counters on a creature. Over Simplify, 3 green blue sorcery, exile all creatures. Each player creates a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the total power of creatures they controlled that was exiled this way. And good old Return to Dusk. And then we have Back to Nature, just simple destroy all enchantments if we're playing against some of those new enchantment builds. Ruinous Intrusion is a newer card, 3 and a green for an instant. Exile target artifact or enchantment, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature we control, where X is the mana value of the permanent exiled away. Scavenging Ooze is a good old favourite, and Time Wipe, we can bounce our commander and then destroy everything else. And we need some protection from everyone else's removal. So we have Feat of Resistance, put a +1 counter on target creature, it gains the protection of a colour of our choice. Make a Stand gives everything indestructible from our creatures. Flax Caster Froglin, 1 green blue for a frog mutant. We can pay 2 colourless, target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, gains Shroud until end of turn. Selfless Squire, 3 and a white for a 1/1 with flash. When Selfless Squire enters the battlefield, prevent all damage that will be dealt to us this turn. Whenever damage would be dealt to us that is prevented, put that many +1/+1 counters on the Selfless Squire. And then we have Snakeskin Veil, put a +1 counter on target creature, it gains hexproof. Together Forever is an enchantment for 2 white. When it enters we support 2, but for 1 colourless, choose a creature with a counter on it. When that creature dies, return that card to its owner's hand so we can reuse them. And Unbreakable Formation. But now for the bulk of the deck, the creatures. Azban Battle Priest gives all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters lifelink. The Azban Falconer gives them all flying. The Bondkin gives them all first strike. Algae Gariel is a 4 mana 1/1 with Shroud, but whenever another creature dies, you may put a +1/+1 counter on the crocodile. We have Basri's Lieutenant. For every time a creature we control died, if it had a +1 counter on it, we make a 2/2 Knight. Champion of Lamholt, just to get through. Crystalline Giant, because we keep getting new counters each turn. And an oldie, Dirt Coil Worm, 4 and a green for a 3/4 worm, that whenever any opponent plays a land, put a +1 counter on Dirt Coil Worm. We have Elite Scale Guard, that whenever a creature you control with a +1 counter on it attacks, tap target creature defending player controls, so occasionally we can get through unblocked. Enduring Scale Lord, whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on another creature we control, you may put a +1 counter on this. Fearless Fledgling is a 2 mana 1/1 with landfall, put a +1 counter on it and it gains flying to end of turn. And the good old Forgotten Ancient. We have Gideon's Avenger, 1 white for a human soldier 2/2. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, you put a +1 counter on it. Good Fortune Unicorn, we add +1 counters for each new creature that enters the battlefield. Herd Baloth, whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on Herd Baloth, we make a 4/4 green beast creature token. And Juniper Order Ranger, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, put a +1 counter on that creature and a +1 counter on Juniper Order Ranger. Lore Scale Coatl, whenever we draw a card, we put a +1 counter on it. Loyal Guardian, as long as we control our commander, we put a +1 counter on each creature we control. The good old Mana Gorger Hydra, Nessian Hornbeetle, so we get +1 counters for every time we go to combat with a creature of power 4 or greater. We have Wonnery of Phage, whenever we draw a card we put a +1 counter on it. Oran Reef Ooze, whenever this attacks, put a +1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1 counter on it. Predator Ooze, it's an indestructible with counters, and Renata, the caller to the hunt. Each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. Scoop Mob, for a single green, if we have 5 or more lands, we can put 4 +1/+1 counters on Scoop Mob. Skatewing Spy. For each creature with a +1 counter on it, has flying. Slith Ascendant, flying. When it does combat damage to a player, put a +1 counter on it. And Thrumming Bird to proliferate everything that we're putting on these creatures. We have some utility. We have Ajani the Great-Hearted, that our creatures have vigilance to keep them back for blocking as well as attacking. But also, we can -2 to put a +1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker we control. And Sagada's Summons, creatures with +1/+1 counters on them have base power and toughness 4/4, have flying, and are angels in addition to their other type, just to make them even more bigger and scarier. And we have the win con. Pretty simple, get 20 counters on this and we win. Plus, it also helps us add counters to our creatures to continuously cast them from the top of our deck. The mana base is pretty simple, Blossoming Sands. Forge of Heroes though, we can tap it, choose a target commander that entered the battlefield this turn and put a +1 counter on it. If it was a planeswalker, we put a loyalty counter on. Novision Heart of Progress, for green and blue, we can put a +1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Oran Reef the Vastwood, we can tap to put a +1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. And then finally a couple more dual lands just to help colour the fix. Rounding out with 12 forests, 9 islands and 9 plains. So what's your thoughts on this budget brew? We've utilised our commander's ability to make as many counters as possible to continuously cast from the top of our library to make threat after threat after threat. Our creatures are going to get huge, swing for the win, and occasionally we can get Simic Ascendancy off for a fun win. And it's surprisingly quick to do as well. But otherwise, let us know what you think in the comments below. If anyone builds it, let me know how it run. I've played it a few times and it's been fantastic. Otherwise, subscribe, comment, like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to check the links below for the Discord and other Patreon items, and we'll see you next time. Bye!